Hello, my fellow journalers. So, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the symptoms of borderline personality disorder, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder. I'm going to make some comparisons to complex PTSD because they can kind of come out a bit similarly. I'm definitely using the wrong words to kind of explain this, but sometimes they look very similar and can be hard to diagnose separately without that. But I found doing my research was really helpful for me personally. And I think the caution I would give you is not to do too much research before you deal with any doctors, because you then might forget to say other things that you experience and might miss your diagnosis, because this is one personality disorder out of 10 that are listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is what they kind of use to list all disorders they find, I suppose. So you would be doing yourself a disfavor by trying to guess what you had, but it's also important to research it so you have a better way of explaining some of the things that you're feeling. But yeah, I found with learning more about borderline personality disorder or emotional unstable personality disorder that CPTSD also came up quite a bit. But the differences are enough to be able to realize, oh, this might not exactly be me. Anyway, without further ado, I will continue. People have different views on BPD, EUPD, and it can be a really controversial diagnosis. But however you understand your experiences and whatever terms you prefer to use, if you feel comfortable with using any of them, the most important thing is that the feelings and behaviors associated with the diagnosis are very difficult to live with. And sometimes being or having a label can help doctors give you the right treatments. And that's kind of what or where I found diagnoses a bit more helpful. To some extent, also for people who are close to you, where you're maybe trying to give a little bit of an explanation. And I know for some people that might feel more like excuses, but I think it's the way that you present it, right? There's a way that you can present it where you're kind of guilt tripping that person. And then there's a way you present it where you're like, these are my kind of tendencies. For example, one of the characteristics is kind of explosive anger. And even though the person who's feeling these things might not necessarily take it out on the other person, but just the way that they start carrying themselves and other things might be alarming for someone else. And it might be an important thing to say, because some people might not be able to handle that. And before you then lose a friend, it might be an important thing to mention. And obviously there's things like therapy and or various kinds of therapies really, that can help with that. Because I think the most difficult thing with people who deal with explosive anger or angry outbursts it's very hard to explain, right? People who deal with these things don't want to get treatment for it, basically. And that's where, I really struggle to reconcile with that. But I think if you're honest with people, they can make an educated decision for themselves with you and how they want to deal with you, I suppose. I don't know how you guys see that. I would love to know. And if any of you guys are also struggling with mental illness and diagnoses around this, it'd be really good to hear what you think about getting a diagnosis and whether it helped you or not, or whether you feel like it's made it worse. So, what is borderline personality disorder? Everyone has a different way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. It's these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that make up our personality. These are often called our traits. They shape the way that we view the world and the way we relate to others. And by the time we're adults, these will make a part of who we are. You can think of your traits as sitting along a scale. For example, everyone may feel emotional, get jealous, or want to be liked at times. But it's when these traits start to cause problems that you can be diagnosed with a personality disorder. And obviously, when I say cause problems, it's not just going to be like arguments. Trying to think of something else that's pretty simple, but there'll be very big things, things that you can't ignore or will struggle to get past without further help or treatment. So EUPD is a type of personality disorder. EUPD can affect how the person with the diagnosis copes with life. Copes with life, manages relationships and emotions. You may find that your beliefs and ways of dealing with day-to-day life are different from a lot of other people. You can find it difficult to change these as well. You may also find emotions confusing, tiring, and hard to control. These can be distressing for you as well as other people. And because it's so distressing, you may find that you develop other mental health problems like depression or anxiety. You may also turn to substances to cope with strong emotions. And not just substances, but other types of self-harm as well. Research shows that around 1 in 100 people live with BPD. It seems to affect men and women equally, but women are more likely to have the diagnosis. This may be because men are less likely to ask for help. BPD is sometimes called emotional unstable personality disorder for this reason, so that people who might be struggling with it can understand the meaning of the diagnosis a bit better, or be able to identify more easily themselves, whereas borderline is a little less descriptive. And I know a lot of people find that aspect of it, the borderline aspect of it, very difficult to resonate with. With that said, doctors prefer to use diagnosis or use borderline because it's what is more widely used. EUPD is a newer thing, same as with DID. Multiple personality disorder is now dissociative identity disorder. But I think it's important to remember that that is how cognitive doctors work. And they use it as a way to describe how your illness develops, and the fact that it is a health condition. The symptoms of borderline personality disorder include emotional instability. The psychological term for this is affective dysregulation. The second one is disturbed patterns of thinking or perception. In other words, cognitive distortions or perceptual distortions. I feel like that needs to be explained a little bit more, I think, just in case everyone's not fully understood that, but it's like the way that you process things. Sorry, I can't find the word in my head. The way that you process things in your mind might not be as accurate as they are in reality, as well as maybe how you've perceived a situation isn't exactly how it is in reality. Another symptom is impulsive behavior. The other, intense but unstable relationship with others. And that kind of stems from the rest of the symptoms. And then some of the other parts of emotional instability include rage, sorrow, shame, and panic, terror, long-term feelings of emptiness and loneliness. And these usually occur in short spaces of time. It's common for people with BPD to feel suicidal with despair and then feel reasonably positive a few hours later. Some people feel better in the morning and some in the evening. The pattern varies, but the key sign is that the moods are unpredictable. Disturbed patterns of thinking include upsetting thoughts. For example, that you're a terrible person, feeling like you don't exist. You may not be sure of these thoughts and seek reassurance that they're not true. Brief episodes of strange experiences, such as hearing voices outside of your head for minutes at a time. These may often feel like instructions to harm yourself or others. You may or may not be certain whether these are real. Prolonged episodes of abnormal experiences, where you might experience both hallucinations, voices outside your head, and distressing beliefs that no one can and distressing beliefs that no one can talk you out of, such as believing your family are trying to kill you. These types of beliefs may be psychotic and a sign that you're becoming unwell. It's important to get help if you're struggling with these delusions. And that's something that in mental health practices, they teach very often, to notice some of the thoughts that you're having so that you can get help before it gets worse. Impulsive behavior can also include self-harm, as well as strong impulses to engage in reckless and irresponsible activities such as binge drinking, drug misuse, going on spending or gambling sprees, or having unprotected sex with strangers. Unstable relationships are as follow. When people with borderline are in relationships, they frequently feel a likelihood of abandonment, and then there's the fear of abandonment, whether this fear is real or perceived, which, goes back to perception and thoughts. This fear of abandonment, can't seem to say words, can lead to intense anxiety and anger. One may be frantic in efforts to prevent being alone. For example, constantly texting or phoning a person, suddenly calling that person in the middle of the night, physically clinging onto that person and refusing to let go, making threats to harm or kill yourself if that person leaves you. Alternatively, you may feel that others are smothering, controlling, or crowding you, which also provokes intense fear and anger. You may then respond by acting in ways that make people go away, such as emotionally withdrawing, rejecting them, or using verbal abuse. These two patterns may result in an unstable love-hate relationship with certain people. Many people with BPD seem to be stuck with a very rigid black and white view of relationships. Either a relationship is perfect and that person is wonderful, or the relationship is doomed and that person is terrible. People with BPD seem to be unable to accept any sort of gray area in their personal lives and relationships. This may be due to that level of emotion changing all the time. Kind of goes with, I'm feeling really good and really good things are happening. This person's great, to everything's horrible. So it kind of makes sense in that context, as well as some professionals recognizing this sort of behavior as splitting, not being able to find the gray area and just having black and white. For many people with BPD, emotional relationships, including relationships with professional carers, involve the go away, please don't go states of mind, which is confusing for them and their partners. And sadly, this can often lead to breakups. I feel like the most difficult thing that I've read with, or in terms of borderline personality disorder, is the stigma. From a lot of the things I've kind of explained, people with borderline or diagnosed as borderline can come off as very manipulative people, because if someone's always changing their moods and has this kind of controlling behaviors at some points and then switches, it's very understandable how that could come off manipulative. So not only is it in relationships, people with diagnoses are struggling. The doctors also don't trust a lot of people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, because in their mind, the person's over-exaggerating. The person's looking for attention. These were the very early markers of borderline personality disorder, someone who seeks attention. And that kind of stems from the hurting myself so someone doesn't leave behaviors. And I think the mistake that the doctors make is treating that as if that's not a reason to get help. If someone is looking to a stranger or can't control the fact that they require that level of attention, then there should be a specific way to make them feel helped. You know, I hope you guys get what I mean. I just don't feel like there's nearly enough out there that doesn't demonize people with borderline personality disorder. And reading about it made it really hard for me to also sympathize. And I have a very close friend who has this diagnosis. And even though I can see some of these traits, it's not as if it comes out the same in everyone. And the fact that borderline or emotionally unstable people have a lot of intense emotions towards themselves isn't really talked about and isn't frequently acknowledged by other people. And I suppose the difficult thing is that it does make sense in some ways, and it can make life very difficult. But I have seen a lot of people with this diagnosis really thrive, and even from my research with YouTube and reading, I have found that people are better off being honest, however hard that is. And even from conversations with some of my friends, you don't want to give someone that power over you essentially by telling them something that's so deep and personal. But at the end of the day, you could miss out on someone really great because you've chosen not to do that because of other people. I think that's just one way to look at it. And I really, really want to know if anyone else sees that too, or anyone else with borderline in a relationship and how you're dealing with it, and any tips that you might want to give. I have a few that I wrote on my dissociation support Instagram, and I feel like they're kind of good for any relationship. And with mental illness, you just have to be more invested in good practices anyway. I think that's the best way to describe it, because if you're invested in doing affirmations and taking time to meditate, taking time for yourself and the things that make you feel good or better, you can draw from that in the time that you need it. There's also therapies like DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. Whereas cognitive therapy is a lot of talking, dialectical behavioral therapy teaches people struggling with impulsive behaviors and thoughts more skills that slow them down in those moments. So that's something else that could definitely help, because that's the thing at the end of the day with this, is that at this point, when you're trying to deal with this kind of thing, you're probably an adult. And if you're listening to this, you're most likely an adult or getting there. And as an adult, we just have more accountability. So we kind of have to do everything we can in order to make our lives easier and the people we love's life easier. I don't know if that makes sense. But I did say that I would kind of do a little bit of a comparison to complex PTSD as well. So here we go. In complex PTSD, the person experiences anxiety, avoidance, self-hate, and dissociation. And although someone with borderline personality can experience these things, a person with complex PTSD is almost more of a quiet BPD. I might do a video on that too, because there's actually different kinds of BPD, which makes it even more confusing, because then it sounds more like complex PTSD. But people with complex PTSD usually, actually, they always, that's something I found in my research, always have prolonged childhood trauma. So that helps to disqualify the diagnosis of CPSD for some people. And then instead of feeling more anger and the intense, bad, good, black and white feelings in regards to relationships. And in terms of relationships, I'm talking about every kind of relationship. I think I mentioned that earlier, but it's work relationships, friendships, family, and then romantic relationships. So that seeps through our relationships. Whereas someone with complex PTSD finds the intimacy of relationships very difficult, and they never feel like a safe space. And this clearly comes from not having that safe space as a child. And a lot of people with complex PTSD have more inner child therapy rather than changing habits and behavior, like behavioral therapy, like I was talking about before. As well as this, people with CPSD have a distorted view of self. So this is relation to devaluing themselves, feeling shame. Whereas BPD, it's I don't know who I am, rather than I am bad or worthless. It kind of is very similar, but I hope you guys can see the differences, the ways I've managed to as well. And then another thing with BPD is that people with BPD engage in a lot of self-harm. And that ends up being very dangerous because a lot of people with BPD end up committing suicide. Whereas with people with complex PTSD, they feel more numb than anything. And it's weird because people with BPD feel empty, which is very similar, but people with CPSD kind of have this continuous feeling of numbness and distrust and discomfort in themselves. And I thought those points were extremely helpful for me personally in trying to understand the differences. And if you yourself are kind of trying to figure yourself out and understand why you're feeling this way, I hope that's been helpful for you as well. And as you can see, my drawing is almost done. This was the front of my sketchbook that I did. I love Adventure Time. Even though it's mainly Adventure Time, I also have this joke where I call people that are close to me fruit fly. And they always take it really offensively, but it's not actually supposed to be an offensive name. And I don't even do it anymore because they're all haters. But I drew a little fruit fly because it's very me, and I thought it was really cute. Looking at it now makes you want to do it again. And I think outlining the drawing is always my favorite part. And always ties it in together really nicely because sometimes without the outline, it does look really funny, but it's nice to see it come to the final stage. And I was really worried it would not look like how I wanted it to, but when I was doing all the outlines, it really came together really nicely. I wish I did the writing a little bit better, but it's what it is. And on the left, we also have Zaylee from Children of Blood and Bone. I'm so excited for that film to come out. Tomi Adeyemi is an incredible writer, and it's a book about fantasy, but it's set in Nigeria, which is just so cool. And if you guys are looking for Black fiction African fiction, this is definitely one of the ones you should listen to. I feel like after I read this book, I could not stop reading books by Africans, specifically Nigerian, to be honest, because that's where I'm from, writers. Because it just feels different. There's certain things I can relate to that I haven't been able to relate to in other books. So it was just kind of an eye opener for me. And then on the other side, we have Baby Esther. Is Betty Boop, the original Betty Boop, if you guys didn't know. There's lots of videos on this now, but Baby Esther was an American singer around the time Betty Boop was created. And in the first ever showing of her, she was actually black. She was also not dressed in the way the Betty Boop of today is dressed. And I'm really tempted to do an image of that, but I don't know if it would be as recognizable because this is the Betty Boop that's popular, right? So I don't know if that takes away from the branding, even though they stole her character and made it into something else. I'm very in between with how I feel about all of that, but we have her on the side. One of my favorite cute drawings. It was really difficult to draw her on the side of my book, actually. But I'm glad I added it anyway. When I was putting everything together, I just wanted to put together some of the things I really liked. I like all the colors that have come together in the end, even though majority of my inspiration is Adventure Time. And I might actually do more characters from Adventure Time because I thoroughly enjoyed that, doing that one specifically. And I feel like my hands are going super slow at this point. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and that you join me next week for more true crime and mental health, mental well-being chats and information and learning together. I'd greatly appreciate it, but I hope that you guys have a good week or rest of your week even. And I'll see you next week. Bye.